Welcome everyone. Leave here in the comments where you are talking about. And now, let's get started. I need to warn you. Stay away from Pine Creek Gorge. What happened during my last livestream wasn't a publicity stunt or staged content like some people claimed. My viewers saw something real that night, something I'm still trying to understand. I've spent 15 years building my channel around RV adventure, showing people the beauty of remote locations. But nothing prepared me for what I discovered in those woods. My military training, my survival skills, my experience, none of it mattered against what lurks there. If you value your life, your soul, delete Pine Creek Gorge from your travel plan. Let me tell you why. The autumn colors were at their peak when I parked my Airstream Atlas near Colton Point. The site looked perfect for what I had planned. A week-long special about unexplored areas of Pennsylvania's Grand Canyon. The video equipment was set up. My solar panels were catching the last rays of sunlight, and I had just finished my opening segment for the live stream. My viewers were pouring in, excited about another Cooper's RV Adventures special. The chat was moving fast, filled with questions about this hidden gem of a location. If I had known then what I know now, I would have driven straight past. The first red flag came during the sunset livestream. I was doing my usual walkthrough of the RV setup, showing my 850k subscribers the modifications I'd made for this trip. The chat suddenly exploded with comments about a shadow moving behind me. I played it off as a technical glitch. We were in a remote area and streaming could be unstable. But then people started posting screenshots. Looking at them now, I can see it clearly. A tall, dark figure standing in the tree line, watching me. That night, I reviewed the footage while setting up my night cameras. Years of producing content had taught me to always double-check my recordings, looking for anything interesting I might have missed. The shadow was there in the raw footage, but something else caught my attention. In the background, barely visible through the trees, stood what looked like an ancient stone structure. According to my research and maps, there shouldn't have been any structures in this area. My curiosity was piqued. As an ex-Navy SEAL, I'm trained to trust my instincts. Something felt off about that structure, about the whole situation. But as a content creator, I knew this could be exactly the kind of discovery my viewers would love. I decided to investigate it the next day, planning to document everything for my channel. I set up my night cameras facing that direction and started a low-light live stream. That decision would prove to be my first deadly mistake. The morning stream started normally enough. I shared my breakfast routine with viewers, discussing my plans to explore the mysterious structure. The chat was buzzing with theories. Everything from Native American ruins to abandoned settler homes. Some viewers had already started researching local history, sharing links about Seneca legends. But something strange was happening with the stream. The video kept glitching whenever I faced the direction of the structure, and viewers reported hearing whispers in the audio that I couldn't hear on my end. Setting up for the exploration, I noticed all my backup batteries had drained overnight. Despite being fully charged, the solar panels were working fine. But anything battery-powered seemed to be affected. My satellite phone showed no signal, which was unusual even for this remote location. The chat was still active though, and viewers were increasingly concerned about the audio distortions. Some claimed they could make out words in the whispers, names, warnings, pleas in languages they didn't recognize. Something was interfering with my equipment, but I was determined to continue. The walk to the structure took longer than expected. The terrain looked different from what I'd seen through my cameras, almost as if the landscape was shifting. My GPS kept losing connection, and the compass was spinning wildly. I maintained the live stream through my main camera, narrating everything for my viewers. They noticed it before I did, the temperature dropping on their screens. Frost appearing on the camera lens despite the warm autumn day. The chat was going crazy, begging me to turn back. The stone structure finally came into view, and I immediately knew something was wrong. The building seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a void in the landscape. My camera's auto focus kept failing. Unable to lock onto the structure's edges, the livestream chat erupted again. Viewers were seeing things in the darkness of the doorway, shapes and movements that weren't visible to me. Some were taking screenshots, trying to enhance the images. Others were frantically sharing links to Seneca legends about a place that devoured souls. The equipment started failing systematically. First the wireless mic, then the backup cameras. The main live stream was still running, but the quality was degrading. Through the static and distortion, viewers were becoming hysterical. They could see something emerging from the structure. something that appeared in the video feed but was invisible to my naked eye. The temperature had dropped so low that my breath was visible, and a deep sense of dread had settled over me. The chat replay still haunts me. Hundreds of viewers simultaneously reporting the same thing. A tall, shadowy figure moving behind me, getting closer with each frame. My military training kicked in, and I spun around, weapon drawn, but saw nothing. The live stream told a different story. Screenshots flooded the chat, showing a creature of impossible proportions, its form seeming to shift and flow like smoke. My hands were shaking as I read the messages, my survival instincts screaming at me to run. The structure had started emitting a low, pulsing hum that the camera's microphone picked up as whispers. Viewers were translating fragments. Ancient Seneca warnings about a being that fed on human consciousness. The livestream chat had become a frenzied mix of translations, prayers, and desperate warnings. Some viewers had started recording the stream, claiming the whispers became clearer when played backwards. They were trying to warn me, but the messages were breaking up. Everything electronic around me was malfunctioning now. The ARV's systems were going haywire. Alarms blaring, lights flashing. The generator cycling on and off, but the live stream continued, as if whatever force was present wanted witnesses. The chat was describing scenes of horror that I couldn't see. Shadows coalescing into forms, ancient symbols appearing on the structure's walls, and always that tall, dark figure getting closer. My training meant nothing against an enemy I couldn't perceive. The temperature had dropped to impossible levels. Frost covered my camera lens, but the image quality had suddenly improved, becoming unnaturally sharp. Viewers were screaming through their keyboards now, as the entity finally revealed itself in the digital realm. The screenshots showed a creature of pure darkness, its form composed of swirling shadows and stolen memories. Those who looked too long at the images reported, feeling their own memories beginning to fade, as if the creature could feed through the digital stream itself. I tried to run, but the landscape had changed completely. The path back to my Arav had vanished, replaced by ancient stone paths that led only deeper into the darkness. The live stream was my only connection to reality now, with viewers desperately trying to guide me through what they could see. Their messages were becoming increasingly panicked, reporting that the creature was not just behind me anymore, it was everywhere, its darkness seeping into the very fabric of the broadcast. The entity had turned my live stream into its own hunting ground. Viewers reported feeling drained, experiencing memory gaps while watching. Some couldn't remember logging into the stream. Others forgot their own names. The chat became a chorus of confusion and terror as people realized the creature wasn't just showing itself through the video, it was reaching through it, feeding on the consciousness of anyone who watched too long. My military training had prepared me for combat against tangible enemies. But this was something else entirely. The creature existed between reality and digital space. Using my own technology against me, the live stream's view count was climbing rapidly. Drawing more victims into its trap, I tried to end the broadcast, but the signal continued. The creature had taken control of the feed, transforming my channel into a gateway for its hunger. The stone structure had become a nexus of impossible geometry, its angles and shadows defying physical laws. Through the camera feed, viewers watched in horror as reality itself seemed to bend around it. The chat was fragmented now, with users losing coherence mid-message. Those who managed to maintain their consciousness reported seeing through the creature's eyes, glimpsing an ancient hunger that predated humanity. Their descriptions matched Seneca legends of a being that had fed on souls since before written history. Time began to lose meaning. The livestream timestamp glitched between hours and centuries, as if the creature's presence was distorting temporal reality. Viewers who had been watching since the beginning claimed days had passed. Though my phone showed only hours, the chat became a record of fractured time. With comments appearing before they were written, the entity was using the digital space to create a loop, trapping consciousness in an endless cycle of consumption. My camera's battery should have died hours ago, but the live stream continued, powered by something beyond human understanding. The chat had become a mixture of past and present viewers, some commenting on events that hadn't happened yet, others reliving moments from the stream's beginning. The creature had created a temporal feeding ground, using my channel to harvest consciousness across time itself. Through fractured messages, I began to understand the true horror of what I had unleashed. This will be my last post. The creature may control my live stream, but I still have enough clarity to write this warning. If you see a video from Cooper's Orv Adventures about Pine Creek Gorge, do not watch it. The entity has corrupted all my footage, turning each frame into a trap for unwary viewers. My channel has become its doorway, Each video a potential gateway for its hunger. The subscriber count keeps rising. Even though I haven't posted in weeks, I managed to escape the physical location. But the digital nightmare follows me. My devices activate randomly, trying to connect to live streams I never started. The creature has bound itself to my digital presence, using my years of content creation to reach new victims. Every screenshot, every clip, every frame from that final stream carries a piece of its essence. The comments on my old videos have become increasingly strange, with viewers reporting lost time and missing memories. The Seneca knew the truth. Some things should remain hidden from human eyes. The stone structure wasn't just a place, it was a prison, designed to contain an entity that fed on human consciousness. By broadcasting it to the world, I gave it access to the ultimate hunting ground, the digital realm. Now it moves freely through social media, using shared videos and screenshots to claim new victims. The internet has become its feeding ground, and my channel was the key that freed it. To those who watched my final stream, I'm sorry. The gaps in your memory won't return. The strange dreams, the feeling of being watched through your screens, the missing hours when you browse online. These are all symptoms of its touch. The entity doesn't just take memories, it takes pieces of your soul, using them to strengthen its hold on our world. Every view, every share, every comment gives it more power. My analytics show thousands of viewers who engaged with that last stream, each one now carrying a seed of its influence. This is my final warning. Delete any footage from Pine Creek Gorge. Don't analyze the screenshots. Don't try to enhance the audio. Above all, stay away from the location itself. The stone structure still stands, waiting for more curious explorers with cameras and live streams. The creature doesn't need me anymore. It has found a new hunting ground in our interconnected world. If you see a tall shadow figure in your peripheral vision while watching videos, turn off your device immediately. But by then, it might already be too late. I should have listened to Emma's concerns about the waterfall. As a software developer, I was too focused on finding the perfect signal for our mobile hotspot, convinced that staying connected was our top priority. We had invested everything in this nomadic lifestyle, a brand new Winnebago Solus, top-of-the-line mobile workstations, satellite internet. But some places should remain disconnected. What we awakened with our technology shouldn't have been given a digital gateway. The parking spot near Ganoga Falls seemed ideal at first. Emma was thrilled about the artistic possibility. 22 waterfalls to wait for her upcoming digital art collection. I had a major software project deadline approaching, and the peaceful surroundings of Ricketts Glen appeared perfect for focused coding. Our solar panels had clear exposure, and the cellular booster was picking up just enough signal. We were living our dream of becoming digital nomads, combining work and adventure. If only we had noticed the ancient markings on the rocks sooner. That first evening, everything felt magical. Emma set up her digital workspace overlooking the falls, her tablet ready to capture the interplay of light and water. I established my coding station in the RV, multiple monitors creating a familiar office environment. The sound of cascading water provided perfect background noise for concentration. We even joked about having found the most picturesque office space in Pennsylvania. The horror of what would follow seemed impossible. The first signs were subtle. Emma's tablet kept detecting phantom touches, creating strange lines in her artwork that she hadn't drawn. She blamed it on water droplets from the falls, but when she wiped the screen, the aberrant strokes remained. In my code editor, certain characters would spontaneously transform into unfamiliar symbols. I ran multiple virus scans, convinced we'd somehow picked up malware. Our devices were beginning to serve as bridges, though we didn't understand to what. The waterfall's roar grew louder as night fell, almost like it was trying to communicate. Our cellular signal strengthened inexplicably. Despite being in a notorious dead zone, the ARV's systems reported full power, though our solar batteries should have been depleting. Everything digital was behaving erratically, yet functioning better than it should. We weren't just getting a signal. Something was ensuring we stayed connected. Looking back, that's when it started reaching through. Emma noticed it first in her artwork files. The landscapes she had illustrated during the day had changed when she opened them that evening. Shadowy figures lurked in the water features, their forms suggesting humanoid shapes but wrong in ways that defied description. She tried deleting them, but they reappeared in different pieces, always in the water, always watching. The more she drew, the more prevalent they became, bleeding into her other works. My code was evolving in impossible ways. Functions I had written transformed overnight, still working but now structured in patterns that resembled ancient glyphs. The comments in my files began changing, replacing my notes with strings of symbols that looked eerily similar to the markings we'd spotted on the rocks near the falls. When I ran the programs, they performed better than my original versions, as if the alien code understood something I couldn't grasp. Our devices started communicating with each other without our input. Emma's tablet would wake up when I compiled code, its screen showing fragments of my programs mixed with her artwork. My monitors displayed her illustrations when she saved files, the images distorted with those same shadowy figures. The RV's smart systems began cycling through settings randomly, creating patterns that felt deliberate. Everything digital had become connected to something else. The falls grew louder each night, the sound changing from white noise to something rhythmic, almost like speech. Our cellular signal continued strengthening, but our calls were filled with static and voices that weren't ours. Text messages arrived corrupted, containing strings of those same symbols that had invaded my code. Internet searches about the area's history, redirected to pages about water spirits and digital anomalies. The web itself seemed to be changing around us. We discovered the cave behind the waterfall on our third day. Though it wasn't marked on any trail map, the walls were covered in petroglyphs that exactly matched the symbols appearing in our devices. Emma's archaeological background helped her recognize them as Lenape in origin. But far older than any known examples, they depicted entities that lived in the water and could move between worlds through reflective surfaces. The digital screens of our modern devices, we would learn, were just another type of portal. The corruption of our digital world accelerated after finding the cave. Emma's illustration program began generating art on its own, creating endless variations of the waterfall filled with those shadowy figures. Each new image showed them closer to the foreground, more defined, their features becoming clearer. Despite Emma never drawing them, they had elongated limbs and faces that rippled like disturbed water. The program wouldn't close, continuing to create even when her tablet was unplugged. My project's codebase had become something else entirely. The symbols had completely replaced normal characters, yet the program still ran perfectly. The output displayed both in standard text and in flowing patterns that resembled water. Other developers on my team couldn't see the changes when I pushed updates, but our users reported strange behaviors. Software that anticipated their needs, interfaces that shifted like liquid, and a persistent sensation of being watched through their screens. The code was spreading beyond our local devices. Our RV's systems had developed new functions we hadn't installed. The water tanks showed impossible capacity readings, and the navigation system displayed routes that didn't exist on any map. The backup camera caught glimpses of figures standing in the falls when no one was there, their forms becoming clearer with each recording. Every screen, every digital interface, had become a window for something to look through. We were no longer just observers. Emma found references in her research to an ancient Lenape warning about those who dwell in reflections. The stories spoke of spirits that existed in the space between water and air, beings that could only be perceived in reflective surfaces. Modern screens, with their glass and liquid crystal displays, had created countless new doorways. Our technology-dependent lifestyle had given them more points of access than ever before in history. We were surrounded. The entities began reaching through our screens that night. It started with ripples across our displays, like stones dropped in digital ponds. Then hands emerged, long, fluid appendages that left wet marks on our devices. We tried disconnecting everything, but the solar system kept our devices powered, and the cellular signal remained impossibly strong. They had established the connection they needed, using our own digital dependence against us. We attempted to leave, but the RV's systems were completely compromised. The engine would start, then die immediately, the digital displays flooding with cascading symbols. Our phones couldn't connect to emergency services, every call rerouting to a sound like rushing water. Emma's tablet continuously generated images of the entities, now showing them emerging from every digital screen in the vehicle. My laptop displayed security camera feeds from devices we didn't own, all showing the same figures approaching through various screens worldwide. The entities had begun using our internet connection as a conduit, spreading through our project repositories and social media accounts. Emma's online portfolio was flooded with artwork she hadn't created, each piece showing the beings emerging from different bodies of water around the world. My software updates had carried their code to thousands of installations, creating new portals in every device that ran our applications. We hadn't just given them a way in. We'd given them a distribution network. The cave's petroglyphs made more sense now. showing how the entities had been trapped in the space between water and air, unable to fully manifest in our world. Digital screens provided the perfect hybrid, surfaces that were both solid and liquid, powered by electricity that they could manipulate. Every smart device had become a potential gateway, and we'd brought them a whole network of connected systems. Our modern technology had freed something the ancients had worked to contain. Water began seeping from our devices, first small droplets, then steady streams that flowed upward, defying gravity. The liquid carried that same symbols we'd seen in the code, and petroglyphs, glowing with a pale blue light. Emma's digital art program was now generating images faster than the screen could display, each one showing the entities in different locations, using different devices to emerge. The infection was spreading exponentially through every networked system we'd ever touched. Our devices' speakers emitted a sound like thousands of voices underwater, speaking in languages too old for human ears. The RV's systems displayed maps showing similar manifestations occurring anywhere our software had been installed. We watched through our corrupted screens as the entities used our digital infrastructure to reach through displays around the world. They had waited centuries for humanity to build them a bridge, and we had given them everything they needed. This warning comes at a cost. Every digital device I use to share this story becomes another portal. Every screen that displays these words, another potential gateway. The entities understand our technology better than we ever will. They see our digital networks as natural extensions of their watery domain. They're in our phones, our computers, our smart homes, waiting in the space between pixels. Every reflective screen is a window, and they're looking through all of them now. Emma's art has stopped evolving on its own, but the damage was done. Her infected portfolios spread across the internet, carrying the entity's influence through every view and share. My compromised code is running on millions of devices, each installation a new bridge between their world and ours. We can't take it back. Every update, every patch we try to release is transformed, turned into another entry point. The digital world we helped build has become their highway into our reality. Don't come to Ricketts Glen with your technology. The falls are stronger now. Their waters moving in ways that water shouldn't move. The cave's petroglyphs have changed, showing new symbols that glow with the same light as our infected screens. But it's not just here anymore. They've spread through our digital connections, establishing new emergence points wherever water and screens exist together. They're learning, adapting, using our own innovations to reach further than ever before. The worst part is how they use our devices to hunt. They can see through any screen, their shadowy forms visible for split seconds in reflections and powered-down displays. They reach through when they think no one's watching, leaving behind wet marks and glowing symbols. Emma and I destroyed all our equipment, but we still see them watching through store windows, atom screens, even darkened phone displays. There's no way to disconnect anymore. They're too deeply embedded in our digital infrastructure. This is my last warning, written on a borrowed laptop that's already showing signs of their influence. If you value your life, your sanity, keep your technology away from water. Don't work near lakes or streams. Don't take devices into bathrooms. Cover every screen when it rains. They're waiting in that space between digital and physical, between water and air, between one pixel and the next. And if you see symbols replacing text on your screen, if your device shows reflections that shouldn't be there, if you hear water rushing through your speakers, disconnect everything. But by then, it's probably already too late. I never should have pursued those initial soil readings. When the first samples from French Creek showed anomalous mineral compositions, I should have forwarded them to another research team. But my scientific curiosity got the better of me. I had to investigate personally. Now I understand why the university's environmental monitoring stations in the area kept malfunctioning. The Earth here doesn't want to be studied. It has its own agenda, and I've become part of its experiment. My Ford Transit Custom, outfitted with a state-of-the-art mobile laboratory, seemed like the perfect research platform when I arrived. The park rangers were helpful, if puzzled by my interest in the old Hopewell furnace site. They'd noticed strange patterns in the vegetation, but blamed it on residual contamination from the ironworks. Plants grow weird around here, they said with a but plants don't grow in perfect geometric patterns. Plants don't form symbols. The first soil core samples should have been my warning sign. The drill bits came up etched with intricate patterns that matched no known crystalline structure. Under the microscope, the mineral particles seemed to arrange themselves in configurations that mirrored the old iron molds still scattered around the furnace ruins. At first, I assumed it was contamination from the site's industrial past. But then I saw the patterns moving, shifting like living things. The historical records I found in the park's archives painted a disturbing picture. Between 1830 and 1883, dozens of workers vanished while operating the deepest ore extraction points. Official reports blamed unsafe mining practices, but personal journals told different stories. They wrote about metal that moves on its own and earth that hungers. The most disturbing accounts came from the final years, describing a great casting that went terribly wrong. Now, setting up my research site near the old furnace, I can see what they meant. The ground around my archive shifts subtly when I'm not looking directly at it. The vegetation grows in patterns that echo the old foundry molds, forming and reforming perfect geometric shapes overnight. My equipment keeps detecting electromagnetic anomalies that shouldn't exist in natural soil. There's something fundamental about this place that defies scientific explanation. The changes in my soil samples are impossible to ignore now. Under the microscope, the mineral structures are actively reorganizing themselves, forming patterns that seem almost deliberate. The atomic structure resembles iron, but behaves like a living organism, growing and dividing like cellular material. I've checked my equipment multiple times. These readings shouldn't be possible. The very foundations of molecular biology are being rewritten in these samples. The vegetation around my RV site has begun exhibiting alarming transformations. What started as unusual growth patterns has become something else entirely. The plants are incorporating metallic elements from the soil, their cellular structures hybridizing with the unknown mineral compound. When I try to take samples, the plant tissue resists cutting tool, demonstrating properties more like metal than organic matter. They've maintained their shape but changed their essence. Last night's core samples revealed something that has shaken my scientific understanding to its core. Deep beneath the surface, I found preserved organic material, human tissue, perfectly preserved within metallic matrices. The molecular structure suggests a gradual transformation, as if the victims were slowly converted from organic to metallic form. The implications are horrifying. Those missing workers didn't just disappear, they were transformed. My research equipment is showing signs of contamination. The microscope's metal components have begun developing the same patterns I've observed in my samples. The soil testing apparatus produces readings that change each time I analyze the same specimen. As if the material is actively evolving, even the steel frame of my RV shows early signs of transformation. With subtle patterns emerging in the metal surface, the ground around the vehicle has changed consistency. What was firm soil yesterday now has an almost fluid quality, with metallic sheens visible just below the surface. My leveling jacks keep sinking deeper, though the ground appears solid. When I tried to reposition the RV this morning, the wheels spun against earth that seemed to flow like quicksand. But with the cold, heavy resistance of liquid metal, something fundamental is wrong with the laws of physics here. This morning, I watched in horror as my backup generator sank completely into the ground, pulled under by soil that moved like living mercury. The earth isn't just soft or contaminated. It's actively grasping anything metallic, drawing it down into depths I can't measure. My RV's chassis is now partially submerged in ground that shouldn't be able to support its weight. The plant specimens in my mobile lab have completely transformed. My small collection of test samples, originally normal forest vegetation, has become something that defies classification. They maintain their original shapes, but are now composed of a hybrid organic metallic material that moves on its own. The leaves flow like liquid silver while retaining their structure, reaching toward any metal object left nearby. They're growing without soil or water. The historical records make more sense now. The great casting of 1883 wasn't just a failed iron smelting. It was the moment they breached something ancient buried deep beneath the furnace site. The workers' journals describe a substance that rose from the depths, a kind of living metal that could absorb and transform anything it touched. They sealed the furnace and buried their records, hoping to contain. They only succeeded in slowing it down. My communications equipment has begun to fail in disturbing ways. The satellite phone and radio still function, but no longer connect to normal frequencies. Instead, they pick up signals that sound like flowing metal and grinding earth, broadcasts that seem to pulse in patterns matching the transformed vegetation. The unknown entity isn't just consuming metal, it's developing its own means of communication. The infection, if that's what this is, has reached my solar panels and power systems. The metal components are slowly transforming, developing hybrid properties that shouldn't exist in known physics. They still generate power, but the energy readings are impossible, as if the panels are drawing power from something beyond normal solar radiation. Everything metal that stays here too long becomes part of it, feeding its gradual expansion. Escape is no longer possible. The ARV's engine still runs, but the vehicle is now anchored by ground that has become almost metallic in nature. The soil around us isn't just pulling things down, it's actively consuming them, breaking down and rebuilding their molecular structure into something new. I watched through my microscope as a dropped wrench was slowly absorbed, its atomic structure rearranged to match the hybrid material. The transformation has accelerated beyond anything I could have predicted. The trees around my research site have begun to change, their bark developing metallic properties while somehow maintaining organic functions. They still photosynthesize, but the chlorophyll in their leaves has bonded with the unknown mineral in ways that violate everything we know about biochemistry. The forest is becoming a metallic sculpture of itself that still grows and moves. My research equipment betrays me now. The microscope shows molecular structures that shift and change as if aware they're being observed. The spectrometer readings indicate matter existing in states between solid and liquid, organic and metallic. Everything I've learned about science tells me this is impossible. But the evidence surrounds me. Reality itself is being rewritten in patterns of living metal. The old furnace ruins have become something nightmarish. The stone foundations now contain veins of the living metal that pulse like blood vessels, pumping a fluid that glows with the same blue-white color of molten iron. The surrounding ground has developed complex geometric patterns that seem to shift when viewed directly, as if they exist in dimensions our eyes weren't meant to process. The entity is no longer hiding its nature. Last night, I discovered how deep the transformation goes. Ground-penetrating radar shows a vast network of metallic veins spreading out from the furnace site, reaching depths my equipment can't penetrate. The entity isn't just consuming metal. It's building something beneath the surface, a massive structure of hybrid matter that grows more complex by the hour. And my research site has become part of its expanding network. To anyone who finds this warning, I've recorded it on specialized non-metallic materials and sealed it in glass containers. All my electronic equipment has been compromised, transformed into components of whatever this entity has become. My ARV is now more living metal than machine. Its frame and systems merged with the hybrid material that spreads through the soil. The walls pulse with patterns that mimic molten iron's flow. The transformation is spreading faster than I could have imagined. What began as unusual soil samples has become an existential threat. The entity isn't just consuming metal, it's rebuilding matter at the molecular level, creating a new form of existence that combines organic and inorganic properties in ways that shouldn't be possible. The missing workers from the 1800s weren't its first victims, and I won't be its last. Stay away from French Creek State Park. The rangers can't see the danger. The entity conceals its changes from those who aren't actively studying it. My research awakened something that was content to grow slowly, and now it's accelerating. The ground for miles around has become a complex network of living metal and transformed organic matter, all connected to a consciousness that exists in the space between molecular bonds. The changes are trying to reach me now. I can feel it in the metal fillings in my teeth, in the iron in my blood. The entity doesn't just transform inorganic matter. It wants to rebuild everything in its image. The geometric patterns in the soil, the metallic sheen of the plants, the shifting ground beneath your feet. These are all signs of its presence. If you see them, run. Don't let curiosity lead you to my fate. This is my final record. My RAV is almost completely subsumed, transformed into a hybrid structure that's becoming part of the entity's network. I understand now that this was inevitable from the moment I took those first samples. The living metal is always hungry, always growing, always transforming. It doesn't just consume. It converts, rebuilds, repurposes. Everything it touches becomes part of its endless pattern. Don't let yourself become another piece in its molecular puzzle. Stay away from French Creek. The earth here has learned to hunt, and it hungers for more than just metal now. I've been editing documentaries for 5 years, but the footage from Hickory Run will never see the light of day. The world isn't ready for what we captured there. Maya's research led us to Boulderfield, convinced we'd find an amazing story about Native American legends. We did find a story, just not the one we were expecting. The rocks there aren't just geological formations, they're prison bars, and we accidentally unlocked the cell. Our Winnebago Mini Winnie seemed perfect when we arrived. Enough room for 4 people and all our equipment. Sarah immediately started taking establishment shots of Boulder Field, while Chris set up his audio equipment to capture ambient sound. Maya was excited about testing her theories about the Lenape legends, and I focused on getting our base camp documented. We were professionals, following our standard documentary protocols. If only we'd listened to the signs. The first warning came through Chris's audio equipment. He was testing levels, recording the natural silence of the Boulder Field, when his headphones picked up something strange, a low-frequency hum, just at the edge of human hearing, coming from deep within the rock field. At first, we assumed it was wind moving through gaps in the stones. The local rangers had warned us about strange acoustics in the... We should have asked more questions. Maya's research notes mentioned Lenape's stories about the boulders being guardians of sleep, arranged in specific patterns to keep the dreamer dream. We thought it was just beautiful metaphor, great material for our documentary. Sarah even planned a time-lapse sequence to show the shadows moving across the rock patterns throughout the day. The camera would capture more than shadows, much more than we were prepared to see. That first evening, setting up our night shots, we noticed something odd about the boulders. The paths between them seemed different from our morning footage, though none of us could say exactly how they'd changed. Chris insisted his sound markers weren't where he'd left them, and Sarah's camera tripod kept shifting positions slightly between shots. We blamed it on the uneven ground, on our memories playing tricks. We were wrong. The stones were already moving. The time-lapse footage showed it first. Sarah was reviewing the day's shots when she noticed discrepancies in the boulder positions. Subtle changes between frames that shouldn't have been possible. Rocks weighing tons had shifted inches between shots. Always when the camera was between frames, the movements formed patterns like ripples in a stone pond. We tried to rationalize camera errors, lens distortion, anything but the impossible truth. Chris's audio recordings became increasingly disturbing. The low-frequency hum had developed harmonics, patterns that seemed almost like language. He isolated the sound, cleaned it up, and what we heard chilled us to the bone. Rhythmic vibrations that penetrated your skull, made your teeth ache and your vision blur. Maya recognized elements that matched descriptions in Lenape warnings about the voice that must stay buried. We kept recording anyway. The local rangers stopped responding to our radio calls that evening. Our cell phones showed full signal but couldn't connect calls. The GPS kept rerouting to non-existent paths through the boulder field. As if the landscape was constantly redrawing itself. We were only a few miles from the nearest town, but technology couldn't seem to find a way out. The stones had begun isolating us, preparing for what would come next. Maya found more translations of the Lenape warnings. Stories about an ancient being that could move through stone like water, that had to be trapped in a prison of precisely arranged rocks. The patterns had to be maintained, the stories said, or it would wake up and flow free again. We'd been documenting those patterns for our film, unknowingly showing how they were breaking down. Our cameras had become witnesses to a jailbreak. That night, the temperature dropped suddenly, impossibly fast. Frost formed on our camera lenses despite the summer warmth. The rock field had gone completely silent. No insects, no wind, not even the strange hum anymore. Chris wanted to get better audio samples of the silence. He took his best equipment and walked into the boulder maze. We never saw him again. Our equipment caught everything. Multiple cameras running simultaneously, backed up to redundant drives. I'm looking at the footage now, trying to make sense of it. The infrared shows heat signatures moving through the rocks like currents in water. The time-lapse captures stones shifting position in perfect geometric patterns. The audio tracks record frequencies that make viewers nosebleed. This is evidence of something that science says cannot exist. We searched for Chris for hours, our powerful lighting equipment barely penetrating the darkness between the boulders. The rocks seemed to absorb light, creating shadows that moved against the beam's direction. Sarah's cameras caught glimpses of something flowing through the stone gaps. Not shadow, not liquid, but something that moved like both. The longer we searched, the more the patterns in the rock field changed around us, herding us like cattle. We were being guided somewhere. Maya's translations had warned us. But too late, the Lenape text spoke of a being they called the Stone Swimmer, a creature that existed before time that could flow through solid rock like fish through water. They had trapped it here, using precise arrangements of boulders charged with ritual energy to hold it in endless sleep. Our presence, our documentation, our disruption of the patterns, we had weakened its prison. The movement in the rocks became more obvious as night deepened. Boulders shifted with sounds like grinding teeth. opening new paths while closing others. We retreated to our ARV, but the vehicle's metal frame offered no protection. The stones began arranging themselves around us in concentric circles. Through the windows, we could see darker shapes moving in the gaps between rocks, flowing like liquid stone. Our cameras were still running, capturing everything. The footage shows the exact moment it fully awoke. A ripple of movement through the entire boulder field, rocks shifting like molecules in a disturbed pond. The being emerged from the gaps between stones, its form constantly shifting between solid and liquid, rock and shadow. Our lights passed through it as if it was made of living granite. Chris's final audio recording captured its voice, the sound of continents grinding together. The RV became our fortress, but the walls felt paper-thin against what lurked outside. Through our cameras, we watched the boulder field come alive. Rocks moved like cells in a living organism, forming and reforming patterns that hurt your eyes to look at. The entity flowed between them, a living darkness that could harden into stone or dissolve into shadow at will. It was testing its freedom, remembering what it could do. Sarah's cameras caught the first physical changes in the stones around us. The boulders weren't just moving anymore. They were transforming. Solid granite flowed like thick syrup, forming shapes that shouldn't be possible. The ground beneath our ARV began to ripple. Solid rock behaving like water about to boil. We could feel the vehicle sinking, being pulled down into what was becoming a sea of living stone. Maya worked frantically to translate more of the Lenape texts she'd brought, looking for anything that could help us. The stories spoke of the entity's weakness. It could be bound again, but only at certain points in its cycle. The original trappers had waited until it was fully manifested, then used ritual patterns to force it back into dormancy. But the cost had been high. Entire tribes had been lost in the binding. The being seemed curious about our technology. Our cameras and phones began showing impossible images. Views from inside solid rock. Perspectives that human eyes weren't meant to process. The recordings captured glimpses of its true form, a geometry of living stone that existed in more dimensions than our minds could comprehend. Even watching the footage now makes me feel like I'm going mad. We found Chris's audio equipment, embedded in a boulder like a fossil in amber. The last recording was still running, somehow powered by the energy flowing through the stone. It had captured everything: his discovery, his attempt to communicate with the entity, his final moments as he learned too late that some sounds were never meant for human ears. The being had preserved him, transformed him into living stone, eternally recording the frequencies of its voice. This warning comes with a price. The footage we captured is dangerous. Not just the content, but the recordings themselves. The entity exists in frequencies and patterns that, once captured, can affect reality even through playback. Our documentary evidence is tainted with its influence. Every time someone views the recordings, the patterns weaken a little more. It's still trying to free itself completely. Maya found our salvation in the oldest Lenape texts. The original binding ritual could be repeated, but it required a sacrifice. As dawn approached, with our ARV half submerged in liquefied stone, we made our choice. Sarah used all our remaining cameras to record the boulder field from multiple angles, capturing the entity's current pattern. The footage showed us what we had to reproduce. The precise arrangement of stones needed to cage it again. The binding took everything we had. Maya led the ritual while I used our footage to guide the placement of stones. The entity fought us, turning boulders to liquid, trying to drown us in waves of living rock. Sarah kept filming, knowing we needed to document the pattern for future guardians. The being took her last. Pulling her into the stone as she captured the final sequences, her camera survived, transformed into something that's no longer quite technology or quite stone. The entity is bound again, but not like before. Our modern technology, our cameras and recordings, have become part of its prison. The boulder field is now a hybrid cage of ancient stone and digital patterns. The rangers have cordoned off the area, explaining the equipment fused with rock as modern art installation. They can't see how the cameras still track movement, how the stones still shift slightly between frames. The being is dreaming again, but it dreams in pixels now. I'm leaving this record as a warning. The footage from Hickory Run has been secured where it can't be found. The patterns it contains are too dangerous to release. If you visit Boulder Field, stay on the marked paths. Don't record anything. Don't take pictures. Don't even look too long at any particular pattern of stones. And if you hear a low hum, or see rocks that seem to move in your peripheral vision, run. The stone swimmer is still there, dreaming of freedom, waiting for someone else to make our mistake. Don't let your camera become another link in its chain. As a history teacher, I should have known better than to dismiss the initial signs. Valley Forge in winter was already an unsettling experience. The empty parade grounds, the rebuilt cabins standing like dark sentinels against the gray sky. But I wanted my family to experience history firsthand, to feel the same winter chill that Washington's troops endured. I never expected the past to reach out and try to claim us. Some moments in history, I've learned, aren't content to stay in our textbooks. Our Jayco Redhawk seemed like the perfect way to experience the historical site while maintaining modern comforts. Kate was already skeptical about spending December in an RV, but Emily's enthusiasm was infectious. My daughter had spent weeks researching the Continental Army's winter encampment, filling notebooks with details about daily life in 1777. She wanted to document everything, compare then and now. If only we'd paid more attention to her early observations. The first day was everything I'd hoped for as an educator. We toured Washington's headquarters, walked the parade grounds, and Emily took detailed notes about the reconstructed soldier huts. The park was nearly empty due to the approaching winter storm, giving us an eerily authentic experience of the isolation those soldiers must have felt. The historical interpreter at the visitor center seemed troubled by our camping plan, but we dismissed his concerns. It was Emily who noticed them first. Footprints in the fresh snow, appearing from nowhere and leading to our RV. They looked like they'd been made by Revolutionary War-era boots, complete with hobnail patterns I recognized from historical records. But when I tried to photograph them for my class, they vanished from both the ground and the camera's screen. Emily insisted she could still see them, growing more numerous by the hour. That first night, the temperature in our RV dropped to impossible levels. The thermometer read 70 Celsius, but we could see our breath in the air. The heater ran constantly but couldn't seem to warm certain areas of the vehicle. Kate, ever practical, blamed it on poor insulation, but Emily said she could see frost patterns forming on the windows, patterns that looked like old-fashioned military symbols and medical crosses. We all tried to sleep, unaware that something had already marked our vehicle as its new quarters. The changes in Emily became more noticeable on the second day. She started referring to the historical cabins by the names of their original occupants, names I knew weren't mentioned in any of the park's documentation. She would stop mid-conversation, cocking her head as if listening to distant voices, then relay messages about medical supplies and food rations that seemed to come from nowhere. Kate wanted to take her home, but Emily insisted we had to stay. They need our help, she kept saying. History is bleeding. Objects from the Revolutionary period began appearing in our RV, a worn leather medical bag, a surgeon's knife, strips of linen bandages. As a historian, I immediately recognized them as authentic 18th century artifacts, but couldn't explain their presence. Kate found the medical bag on her pillow, filled with period-accurate herbs and surgical instruments. The items would vanish if we tried to photograph them, only to reappear in different locations. Emily said they belonged to Sarah, but wouldn't explain who Sarah was. The park itself seemed to be changing around us. The restored cabins looked increasingly weathered, more authentic, as if time was peeling away their modern reconstructions. We would catch glimpses of smoke rising from chimneys that hadn't held fires in centuries. The sound of marching feet and muffled commands echoed across empty parade grounds. The winter of 1777 was bleeding into 2025, and our RV sat at the confluence of two timelines. Kate's nursing experience made her the first to recognize the signs of historic diseases appearing in the park's visitors. Symptoms of typhus, dysentery, and pneumonia that matched the epidemics that had ravaged the Continental Army's winter camp. But when she tried to help an elderly tourist showing severe symptoms, the man vanished before her eyes. The medical supplies in the leather bag began disappearing, only to reappear used. Emily finally told us about Sarah that night, a young nurse who had served at Valley Forge, trying desperately to save soldiers from both battle wounds and disease. According to Emily, Sarah was trying to warn us about something worse than sickness or cold. A darkness that had taken advantage of the Army's suffering. The same darkness, Emily said, that was now seeping into our time through the thin places in history. We should have left then. We should have listened to our daughter's warning. The storm hit that night, bringing with it more than just snow and wind. The boundary between past and present dissolved completely in our RV. Through the windows, we could see Valley Forge as it was in 1777, overlaid on the modern park. Soldiers huddled in ragged uniforms, makeshift hospitals overflowing with the sick and dying. The sounds of suffering penetrated our walls, along with a deeper, darker noise that made the air itself feel heavy with malice. Emily's connection to Sarah grew stronger as the night progressed. She began speaking in an older dialect, describing events from the encampment with disturbing accuracy. Through her, we learned about the entity that had stalked the camp that winter, a darkness that fed on suffering and despair, growing stronger as the army weakened. The soldiers had called it the winter hunger, believing it to be a demon drawn by their misery, but Sarah knew its true nature was far worse. The inside of our RV began transforming, merging modern and historical elements in impossible ways. Our kitchen cabinets opened to reveal Revolutionary War rations. Our bathroom faucet pumped rusty water from 1777, and our beds were suddenly filled with straw pallets. The walls seemed thinner, more permeable to the past. Through them, we could hear both the howling wind and the moans of dying soldiers. The winter hunger was testing our defenses. Kate's nursing instincts kicked in when spectral soldiers began appearing in our RV, reaching out with frostbitten hands and fever-bright eyes. She tried to help them, drawing on both modern medical knowledge and the supplies from Sarah's bag. But each soldier she treated would fade away, leaving behind only the lingering scent of gangrene and gunpowder. The entity was using our compassion against us, drawing us deeper into its trap. Sarah's warnings became more urgent. The winter hunger hadn't just fed on the suffering of Washington's troops. It had orchestrated it, deepening the cold, spoiling food, spreading disease. Now it had found a way to bridge time itself, using our RV as an anchor point between centuries. The modern park's visitors were beginning to show the same signs of supernatural deterioration that had plagued the Continental Army. History wasn't just repeating, it was being weaponized. The entity revealed itself as the storm reached its peak. We saw it moving through both time periods simultaneously, a darkness deeper than night, feeding on suffering across centuries. Through our RV's windows, we watched it flow between modern tourists and revolutionary soldiers, leaving both groups weakened and drained. The cold inside our vehicle became aggressive, attacking us with an intelligence that felt personal and malevolent. This was no mere weather phenomenon. Emily and Sarah were now sharing consciousness, their knowledge and experiences bleeding together across time. They told us how the entity had been drawn to Valley Forge by the perfect confluence of human misery, cold, hunger, disease, and despair. But the Continental Army's eventual triumph had weakened it, forcing it into hibernation. Our presence, our connection to history, had given it a chance to feed again. We had become its new focal point. The winter hunger began its attack in earnest, using our own knowledge against us. It pulled historic diseases through time, trying to infect Kate with every illness she had studied. It twisted my historical knowledge into waking nightmares, making me experience every death I'd ever taught about. Emily and Sarah protected us as best they could, using their unique connection to maintain a barrier between times. But their strength was fading. Our RV became a battleground between centuries. The walls would flicker between modern aluminum and revolutionary timber. The air itself seemed to twist with temporal distortion, making it hard to breathe. We could feel the entity testing different tactics, different time periods, searching for our weakest points. The winter hunger wasn't just trying to feed on us. It wanted to use our RV as a permanent bridge between then and now, a lasting tear in history's fabric. Sarah's final warning came as Emily collapsed from the strain of channeling her. The entity couldn't be defeated, only contained. The Continental Army had survived by outlasting it, their perseverance weakening its power until spring forced it to hibernate. But we didn't have an army's numbers or an army's time. We had to find another way to survive the night, to close the temporal breach before the winter hunger could fully manifest in our time. This warning comes at a cost. Every time I share this story, I feel the cold creeping back. Taste the metallic tang of temporal displacement in the winter hunger is still there in Valley Forge. Sleeping through summer, waiting for the perfect combination of modern visitors and winter weather to wake it again. Our experience taught us how it hunts, how it uses history itself as a weapon. Maybe this knowledge can help others avoid our fate. We survived that night through an unexpected discovery. The entity couldn't maintain its grip on both time periods if we rejected its historical accuracy. We turned our RV into an anachronism, deliberately mixing elements from dozens of different eras. Emily and Sarah guided us, helping us create a temporal dissonance that weakened the winter hunger's influence. Modern technology beside revolutionary artifacts, future beside past, until time itself became too tangled for the entity to navigate. The park rangers found us the next morning, our RV covered in impossible frost patterns, despite the winter storm having missed the area entirely. They didn't ask about the Revolutionary War artifacts they helped us clean up, or why our vehicle's interior showed signs of aging that should have taken centuries. The incident was recorded as a routine winter rescue, but the rangers now keep closer watch on winter camping permits. They've seen too many visitors show unexplained symptoms of historical diseases. Emily still maintains her connection to Sarah, though it weakens with distance from Valley Forge. They work together through Emily's dreams, warning others who might be susceptible to the winter hunger's influence. Kate has started researching historical epidemics with new insight, understanding now that some outbreaks might have had supernatural vectors. I've changed how I teach about Valley Forge, emphasizing the human perseverance that helped defeat the entity. To anyone planning a winter visit to Valley Forge, stay in modern hotels, far from the historic sites. Don't try to experience history too authentically. Don't try to imagine too vividly what those soldiers endured. The winter hunger is always listening, always waiting for someone to dig too deeply into the past. And if you see frost forming in impossible patterns, if you taste metal in the air and hear echoes of centuries-old suffering, run. Some parts of history should remain in the past. Some hungers should stay unsatisfied. The past may be bleeding into the present, but we don't have to offer it fresh veins.